Welcome and good afternoon to the Landscape Success Series of lectures presented by Fort Bend County AgriLife Extension and Fort Bend Master Gardeners. My name is Nancy Scheck, and I'm a Fort Bend Master Gardener in charge of programs. If you're new to us, the Fort Bend Master Gardeners are trained volunteers who assist the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in educating the community with research-based horticultural information. Today, we're presenting Landscape Success Class number 2, which will cover turf grass. Hopefully you all signed up for this. This lecture will be recorded and we will email the link and resources to all registrants in the upcoming week. You can find video links of past classes and our in-person Grow Your Own classes on our website, fbmg.org, and a link will also be provided in the chat. These videos are also on the Fort Bend AgriLife YouTube channel. We kindly ask that everyone mute yourself, turn off your video during the lecture so we can make a good recording. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to address everyone's questions. I'm thrilled to introduce our instructor, Don Parkhouse, who has been a resident in Texas for over 70 years, 40 plus of them in Fort Bend County. Don and his wife, Mary, are highly skilled master gardeners and also master naturalists. Don has received specialized training in turf grass, rainwater harvesting, and irrigation efficiency through the Master Gardener program. During his early years with Master Gardeners, he dedicated himself to the hotline operation where he provided prompt and reliable responses to public inquiries. Currently, Don devotes much of his volunteer time to maintaining and enhancing our demonstration gardens and participating in our fundraising events. Without further ado, I would like to turn the class over to Don.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome to all of you. I think Nancy's already covered that this is an AgriLife Extension, Fort Bend County Master Gardener program. We talk about turf. I generally title this as turf and lawn care. So we'll touch on that as we go through. I won't do much of this, but this is a blatant invite to come out to our demonstration gardens. I won't guarantee that you'll see this particular butterfly, but come out, see our gardens, and enjoy it. You're here today because of our turf team, and I have to say that our team is probably somewhat of a stretch. Today, it's myself and our county hort agent, Boone Holiday. I've had a couple of other members, and unfortunately, they've both moved out of the area recently. I think Nancy touched on all of these, so there's really not too much to go here, but you're here today for information about your lawn, and let's get on with that. As far as thinking about your lawn, or as the title here says, talking about rethinking, what do you think about your lawn? Is it something you have because you have to have it, because you have a home? Or is it something else? Is it a point of pride? Is it a way to escape, something you enjoy? But let's dig in a little deeper. We're all in Zone 9. That's Greater Houston. Actually, all of Fort Bend County would be in Zone 9 as far as a growing area. That means we get 46 to 50 inches of rain a year, have warm temperatures. Most of us are going to have clay soil. There's a little bit of the county that has some sand, but by and large, we all have a clay base. And I'll make the assumption that your lawn is already in place, that you're not laying sod or currently throwing out seed trying to get a lawn started. But if that is the case, let us know in the chat. And if you've got specific questions, I'll try to address those. Many of you live in areas that have an HOA, and here in Texas, some of us think they're a little too powerful, but they do tend to dictate what we can have in the way of a lawn in terms of right down to what type of grass you can have. You've got neighborhood covenances and groups, plus your own expectations. And what should your lawn look like? First question, though, to ask is, what type of grass is your lawn? All of the grasses that we have in Fort Bend County are warm season grasses. There are cool season and warm season. Cool season will not grow here. This particular slide comes up and it's got all of the warm season turf. And I have to tell you, I personally question these. Bahia grass, I've never seen one as a lawn. I had 17 acres as a hay field, and as a hay, it was super. Grass, I wouldn't recommend it. A lot of you have got Bermuda grass. Buffalo is listed as a warm season because of our high humidity. It does not do well here. Centipede, very little. Seashore paspalum, down in the Galveston area, you'll run into that, primarily because of the salt content. We do have St. Augustine, and we're beginning to see more of the zoysia grasses. So I will be concentrating on the Bermuda, the St. Augustine, and we'll touch on zoysia. Within those, you'll see that there's a lot of different varieties of each one of these. If you take a good look at Bermuda, you see a whole lot of TIFs listed in there. And that comes from Tifton, Georgia, which is the home of the University of Georgia, Tifton campus, and that's where their turf program is. If any of you have traveled to that area or you're big golfers, you understand why that's a big deal for the people of Georgia. And so many of our Bermuda grasses that are used in sports fields have come out of their work. The St. Augustine, you've got your Floritim and the Raleigh are probably the two most prevalent that we find in this area. The zoysia, the Cavalier, and the Palisades are the two that are quite prevalent. Let me skip back up to the Bermuda. The last one on the second grouping is Tifway 419. I know the Del Webb community, that is their standard. I believe out in Cinco Ranch, they have gone with the Tifway 419 as their standard. It's just a particular variety of a Bermuda grass. Getting a little more into depth on each one of the three. St. Augustine, if you kind of look at that, where the green shade is, that's I-35 is the best way to think of that. Things to remember about St. Augustine have to do with the growth habit. We only have stolons listed there. That's surface runners is the best way to think of a stolon. Strengths of the grass, you've got drought and shade tolerance. That's one of the biggest problems we have, particularly with older developments. The trees that were required to be planted have now grown and shade the lawn, and the lawn begins to die out. So St. Augustine has a real advantage in terms of shade tolerance. The other thing is mowing height. The St. Augustine at 3.5 inches is the highest mowing height of any of the grasses we'll be talking about today. The longer the grass or the taller the grass, the less frequently you have to mow, and it tends to shade out some of the weeds. So it works for itself in that regard. The weaknesses of St. Augustine, cold tolerance really isn't an issue for us, except what's it been for a week every other year. The other is chinch bugs. That's if you have Bermuda, you don't have chinch bugs. You have St. Augustine, you might. Moving along to Bermuda, you see that it goes a little further west as far as where it will grow. Don't be confused there by the darker green. That's just your major metropolitan areas are designated there. Growth habit, we have stolons and rhizomes. Think of stolons as being on the surface. A rhizome is like a root, it's underground, but it does spread in both fashions. The heat tolerance and the low disease potential are two of the strongest strengths we find with the Bermuda grass. Shade tolerance is down in the weakness category on this. It's still got to have a minimum 6 hours of sunlight a day. The other is what some people consider high fertilization. It probably takes a third more fertilizer than St. Augustine or even the zoysia might. Other thing to consider here is 1 to 2 inches as a mowing height. The shorter the grass, the more frequently you're going to have to mow. But people like Bermuda because it really grows fast. I don't know how long it'd take to come up through this cone. I think it was a hilarious picture that someone found to take. But if you have gardens and you have Bermuda grass, you know how rapidly it grows and invades things. A lot of people look at it as being an invasive, but it is fast growing, fast recovery, and very drought and heat tolerant. Our last grass is the zoysia. Again, you've got rhizomes and stolons for the growth habit. It's a little more shade tolerant than the Bermuda. One of the things we've not mentioned before in weakness is thatch. Both St. Augustine and Bermuda don't seem to be plagued by that, but thatch is really a problem with zoysia. You'll see that mower blade sharpening under weaknesses. It's because this is a very tough grass. And because of that, it doesn't chop itself up even with a mulching type blade. So you do tend to have more thatch formed in the zoysia grass. You're down at the shorter height, the 1 to 2 inches. So again, you're into a more frequent mowing pattern than you might be with St. Augustine. Fertilization is pretty much on par with St. Augustine grass. Let's take a look at what grass looks like, or just a grass plant itself. See there the stolon and rhizome indication where one comes out on the surface, puts down roots, the other comes up out of the ground, and then the roots have already been established. That's why both zoysia and Bermuda grass tend to grow as rapidly as they do. The blade is what we want to cut off. You don't want to get down to where you're cutting the tiller, and certainly not at the crown level of the plant. The 1/3 rule there at the bottom we'll come back to and touch on a little bit more, but it has to do with not taking more than 1/3 of the blade in any one cutting. You take too much off, you really hurt the plant in terms of its growth capability and recuperative capabilities. Okay, you've got a yard. And generally, when you look at it, people say, gee, what's wrong with my yard? It's not this, it's not that. And what we have listed here are what I would call the big four: the soil, mowing, water or irrigation, and fertilization. And these are what I would call the positives. Later we'll get into the negatives, the weeds and the bugs and some diseases. But these are the things that you do to really enhance your yard, make it greener, make it grow more, make it look a little nicer, those sorts of things. But let's take them one at a time. Let's look at soil to start with. Most of you have got clay soil. If you're lucky, you've got just a good clean clay soil. The picture on the far left is what I would call your XYZ trash backfill. Unfortunately, with some of the new developments, your developer gets the slab poured, they're ready to start the construction on the house. They just need fill around the concrete. and whatever they can get a hold of is what goes in there. It may have a little sand to it. It's have some clay soil. It's not necessarily going to be uniform. So if you're in one of the newer neighborhoods that have been developed in the last few years, just be aware that what you see immediately around the house may be different 5 feet away from it. And 5 feet from there, again, different still, because the soil that is around the house used for fill was brought in. With clay, one of the big problems we get into is compaction. Clay does compact very well. If you're in an older home and there's been any work done around the house, one of the things that happens is you get heavy equipment or just settling of the soil, and you begin to get compaction. The downside to that is compacted soil has very little air in it. And air is one of the things we need for the roots to have access to in your grass plants in order for it to grow and flourish. So next item has to do with aerification of that compacted soil. And the picture on the left is a hollow tine. The tine is truly hollow. It takes out plugs as it works. And after you've run through the yard with one of these particular type of machinery, the yard is a mess. It has all of these little pieces, cylinders of root, dirt, grass that's been pulled out and thrown off to the side. But it does an excellent job in terms of providing aerification, relieve some of the compaction on the soil. The holotine is preferred to the solid, which simply punches holes. My personal recommendation would be, if this is something you feel you need to have done, have it done, hire it done. Whether you're doing it or someone else is doing it, be sure that they mark all your irrigation heads, locate any surface or near surface tree roots, and aerification, and then using a top dressing, using some type of a good compost, are about all you can do to improve the soil that's beneath your grass. You don't want to take out all the grass, take out all the soil and start over again. On top of that soil, hopefully you've got grass growing and you're mowing it. And whether you mow it or you have it done, if you don't maintain your own lawn, at least look at the results of your yard surface. Are you happy with what you see? Hopefully the answer is yes, certainly, if you're paying to have that done. This is something that, bottom of my slide didn't come out in this. That's terrible. It says mowers did not exist until the 1800s, except for the one on the left. It's been around a long, long time. The one on the right is an old style reel mower, which we still find mechanized reel mowers, but neither one of these options would set you back the 10 to 50K that you might spend on something like this. And I have to say that if any of you out there need a mower of this type, this talk probably not for you. We're not going to get to that level, but lawnmowers for these athletic fields have gotten to be quite expensive and very specialized. You as a homeowner, how often do you need to mow? We talked about St. Augustine going to 3.5 inches. At 3 inches, you could take an inch off and you've only taken a third of the blade. And again, you're trying to not take more than a third because you want to have enough there to have photosynthesis taking place in your grass, but yet you want enough taken off to where it's not shading itself or holding more moisture than you want it to. So most of the grasses, St. Augustine, you could get by once a week. Bermuda, it may be every 5 to 6 days because you have a shorter leaf blade. So taking a third off you just have to mow it a little more frequently. That becomes a decision you have in terms of what's acceptable to you in the way your yard looks. One other thing to remember is if you mow low, you're making a commitment to mow more frequently. Both the zoysia and the Bermuda grass are going to look better when they're mowed shorter. I won't say much about mowers other than right here to make the comment about blades. The blade of grass on the right was cut. The one on the left was beaten. And sharp blades do make a difference. If you're doing your own yard, at least sharpen your blades once a year. And if you start seeing the effect of shredded tops to your grasses, think about pulling those blades off or blade off and sharpening them. The other thing about mowing is how should you mow? And I think one of the most important things, and it's overlooked frequently, is people get in the pattern of, okay, I'm just going to make a circle and work my way from the outside to the end, or I'm going to go up and down. And they do the same thing week after week after week. And that will create ruts. They may be almost imperceptible, but you do create slight ruts in your yard. And the grass becomes trained to being cut in a particular fashion. So alternate your pattern. Go left to right or north south this week, go east west next week, and be daring and go diagonal. As long as you're uniform in it, there's nothing wrong with alternating the pattern that you mow your yard in. The one other thing that has a real impact on that is almost all mowers discharge to the right-hand side. So as you're going past your flower beds or your sidewalks, that may dictate that you're going to mow a particular direction, and that's acceptable. The mulching side of it, we used to recommend bagging the clippings. That probably started phasing out 20 years ago. Mulching, particularly with St. Augustine and Bermuda, works very well. And mulching is no more than cutting the blade off from the plant itself and then cutting it 2 or 3 more times underneath the mower deck. And on first go around, there were actual lawnmowers that advertised as being, this is a mulching deck. The truth today is almost any mower can be a mulching mower simply by installing a good mulching blade. Almost all of, well, any of your big box stores would have a mulching blade of different length that probably fits your mower. It's going to have a slightly longer cutting surface to it, and it'll have probably a secondary cutting surface. And that's the easiest way to differentiate what a mulching blade is going to offer you. Now, I've covered mowing. I talked about soil. I see we've had a couple of questions come up in the chat. Nancy, can you tell me if there's something I need to address?
Hey, Don. No, there are no new questions.
Okay, super. We'll move along. We've got the soil. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. Maybe aerify it if we need to. Talked about your mowing and your pattern of mowing and frequency of mowing. How frequently you mow has a lot to do with how much water it gets. And this is a big item for so many homeowners, particularly if you're buying a new home. It's got an irrigation system. A lot of irrigators, they put in the irrigation and they'll set it to run every day sometimes. And if that's the case, it's too frequently. Tell you that right up front. So, I can't take credit for the waterboarding. My cohort that has now moved away, that was on the turf team, put the two together, but it's not too much different that you practically drown your lawn sometimes if you're overwatering. Overwatering, biggest thing that occurs is you can kill the grass, but fungal problems that come out of that. Wasted water is another big one. And we talk about the watering plan based on soil type. I commented most of us have a clay soil, and that's takes a different type of watering in terms of how frequent or how long, how much. Almost all the yards, whether you've got St. Augustine, whether you have Bermuda or Azoysia, need about an inch a week. And any low spots in your yard you might want to fill because water will migrate there, and then you tend to have an overwatering situation. And we'll get more into the environmental factors, wind, humidity, those sorts of things, I think a couple of slides down the road here. When and how you water really do make a difference. How much or how little affects the growth, which affects how much you mow and how much frequently you mow. Too much water can cause fungal diseases is the biggest thing to be aware of. I don't want to just harp on clay soils, but because it's what we have, or the vast majority of us have, take a look at the slide. It talks about how the water seeps into clay much more slowly. You turn your irrigation system on and let it run, it won't be long before you have runoff occurring. Most of your anything that's been put in the last 4 to 5 years probably has a soak and cycle capability. If your irrigation system doesn't have that, you could do it yourself. And what that is running a cycle for 10 minutes, maybe 15. And that kind of breaks the surface tension of the clay on the surface. Run it for each one of the zones in your yard, and then come back and run it longer, because at that point, your clay soils will accept more water. Trying to get that inch a week all at once is very difficult also. Don't recommend it every day. You want to have enough water to where it is penetrating and going down, not just right at the surface. Thing here is a beautiful lawn doesn't just happen. You've got management that goes on. It's mowing, watering. We'll touch on fertilization as well. But each one of those is somewhat interdependent. You can conserve water by properly fertilizing. You can use more water, but then you have to mow more. So each one of those is going to have an impact, and you just have to be aware of how those things come together. I mentioned would come back to the environmental: humidity, wind, air temperature. Those are the things you can't program into your controller. And unfortunately, there's really no sensors for these. But there are times when we have very strong winds out of the south that tend to be very humid. The air temperatures, we just have higher temperatures here frequently. So those things do have an impact on your grass or your lawns, and how much water is required. If the wind's blowing, it does dry out the soil much more quickly, particularly with both Bermuda and Zoysia, because of the lower blade height. Obviously, during the summer, you're going to need more water, just simply because it's going to evaporate more of it than it gets into the ground. When and how. An automated system is by far the way to go. But I do ask that you don't just turn it on, set it and forget it, or worst case, if you move into a house, at least try to find out all you can about your irrigation system. Before I forget, if you have an irrigation system, there's something called a rain freeze sensor. And based on yesterday, I got an inch of rain at my home. So I got my inch for the week on my lawn. I don't need an irrigation system to go off, and that's what a rain freeze sensor would do. It shuts down your irrigation system after the rain. And I won't go too far into that. I think 2 months from now, we're doing an irrigation class. So tune in for that one and they'll go into it more deeply. But this idea of avoid set schedules, well, with an automated system, you really can't do that. But something to be aware of is go walk on that grass. Does it crunch underfoot? Do you leave footprints? Those are all trying to tell you something. If it crunches, it's too dry. If it leaves a footprint and the grass then does recover, it's probably in really good shape. As far as the best time of day, early morning, not at night, but early morning. You don't want your grass to stay wet. That's one of the worst things for it. We talk about 6 inches, and I'll put in a plug for using a moisture meter. You may have it for your garden beds today, but it'll work in your grass just as well. Check it out and see what depth your soil is getting moist to. And if you're not getting it down deep enough because of runoff, maybe running, again, the soak cycle type thing will give you a way to get more water into the ground, deeper into the ground. The deeper you can get it, the better the root system of your grass is going to be. And overall, the system, your entire lawn will be better off. The condition and position of your sprinkler heads or sprinkler system, again, come to the irrigation class. But if you have those that obviously are not working, talk to your irrigator or whomever, see if you can't get those, because they'll obviously have an effect. The last item there is very, very true. Shallow watering is probably every bit as bad as overwatering. You water every day for a short period of time, you could put out that inch a week, but a lot of it's going to be lost to evaporation. It never gets to the root zone of your grass, and the diseases and the pests love you for it. The pests are generally higher in the soil, and having that moisture is super for them. Let me make one more stop here and ask Nancy if you had anything come out of that raised questions.
Yes, hi, Don. I had 2 questions. One was, can a sensor be added to an existing irrigation system? And I answered it yes, generally. Do you have more to add?
Most systems that are in use today, yes, you could add it to it fairly easily.
Okay, and then I had one question, I think it disappeared, but it was for a mulching mower. Is that generally used by yard crews?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I would think it would be, because the cost of the blades is almost identical. It's to their advantage to not have to bag. And if they don't have to bag, they don't want the clipping. So mulching is by far the way to go if they're trying to achieve a particular look, much like a homeowner would.
Okay, those are the only 2 questions.
Okay. Well, let's fertilize the yard then. Big thing here is do it at the right time with the right product. I'll let you all take a look at that, and I'll make some comments as well. The what to apply, whatever you have, please read the label. If you've not done a soil test, do it now, because we'll talk about NPK, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and we talk about a 3-1-2 as far as the recommended ratio there. But frequently you have a soil test done and you'll find that nitrogen is what you need and probably very little else. So if you you can go online and get most of the information, or you could stop by the Master Gardener office out near the fairgrounds in Rosenberg. They do have sample bags and the written instructions for how to collect the soil and where to send it off to. But a soil test prior to fertilization, particularly if you're in a new home, getting some feel of what that soil is that your grass is trying to grow in will really be helpful in terms of what types of fertilizers and what problems you may be addressing as well. One more time, taking a look at these, you've got your top three that are your primary elements. Then you get into your secondary, and then the trace, starting with iron going on down. And our primary concern is going to be the primary elements, and particularly it's going to be the nitrogen content of that fertilizer. Nitrogen's what's going to make it green. It's also going to be what causes you problems if you put too much of it on. And that's the reason to try to read the label and follow the instructions for what they have. Got a picture here of a bag of fertilizer, and looks like it says it covers, it's 50 pounds, covers 1,400 square or 14,000 square feet. It has instructions for a rotary spreader, probably has instructions down at the bottom somewhere there for other types of spreaders. And as we talked about, the 3-1-2 ratio is pretty closely met there, or as closely as you're going to find with a commercial blended fertilizer that you might pick up at any of your big box stores or garden centers. But be aware in looking at fertilizers, those are percentage content. There's 50 pounds there, it's 28%. So you have 14 pounds of nitrogen in that bag of fertilizer. So if you put out the whole thing over 14,000 square feet, that's putting a pound per thousand. And that's pretty close to what the recommendation was when we looked at both the St. Augustine and the Zoysia. It may be a little bit light on your Bermuda, but it's close. Other things to consider when you're looking at fertilizers, you've got a quick release. And the thing there is quick release equals quick green up. You can put some of these products out today and begin to see improvement tomorrow, 2 days at most. Big thing to remember, any of these is water them in, whether it's your quick release or any of your other fertilizers. The downside to some of these is over application, and you can burn your lawn. That's where your slow release or coated fertilizer, the one on the left is actually using sulfur and it's coating it versus a poly-coated. In both cases, the outer shell melts away and releases the fertilizer over time. And the biggest advantage is that it's not going to burn the lawn. It tends to last a little longer. It spreads more easily and it spreads more evenly. They do cost a little more than some of the other non-coated fertilizers. I don't think there's any question where this individual put the fertilizer. It's a uniform application, no question about it. It's just not uniformly green. The They were very careful. Looks like they probably used what's called a drop spreader, where the fertilizer comes right out of the bottom of the hopper. And they were very, very good in their uniformity of how they traveled, but they just missed something. Had they gone two directions, maybe a little lighter pattern, they would have gotten a better green up overall. So rotary spreader, I prefer over a drop spreader. You're covering 14 to 16 inch wheel width, usually with those things, maybe 18, but yet you could cover up to 6 feet wide as you push the thing along and put the fertilizer out. Still, a two direction coverage is always going to be better, but be sure you adjust your application rate for the fact that you're going over it twice. Let me take a break here. I see there are a couple of more questions that have come up. What else you got there, Nancy?
Hey, Don, I don't have any more questions.
Oh, okay. I just saw the things popping up in chat.
Okay, sorry.
I put this particular slide in because I did want to at least introduce the concept of some of the calendars. This one is just grass growth pattern. And you see January and February, there's no grass shown in this one. Hopefully we all still have some, it's just not terribly active. But you know, we've covered what I call the big four: the soil, the mowing, the water, fertilization. These are the basics. This calendar is true for any of your warm season grasses. January and February, it may not look like you have anything to do, but there is some preparation, because we're going to get into weed control here shortly. And if you start in February, you have a much better chance of controlling your weeds. The other thing I want you to begin to think of, this one's a calendar that just has growth. We'll talk about some other types of calendars for your lawn. And you begin to build a history with your lawn. At least make some notes of, yeah, last February I put out this kind of fertilizer, this much. I did it this way. If it worked out right, do it again. If it didn't, if you have the notes to go by, you could try something different. But we'll talk about the other types of calendars. They're grass variety specific, and more depth later in the talk. Again, we've covered the mowing, the water, the fertilization, etc. But there's still something wrong with the yard. And that's difficult to come up with because there's different things that can cause it. It's nicer, I guess, to say weeds, diseases, and pests instead of weeds, fungus, and bugs. But fungus is the biggest disease we have. And so much of that is brought on by us, the homeowner, doing something improperly, overwatering, over fertilization, or doing it at the wrong times. And then the pests, well, we do what we can to control them and hope we can keep them out of our yard. I mentioned with the grasses when we got started that we're talking about warm season grasses. With weeds, we have both warm season, we have cool season, and then we've got the three major groups: the broadleaf, which is just what the name implies. Then we have the grasses. You've got goosegrass and crabgrass. There's something called KR bluestem that's fairly prevalent. Highway department had used that for seeding and overseeding when they've done construction along the highways, and it seems to produce a lot of seed and blow off everywhere. And then we've got sedges. Now, the thing about sedges is sedges have edges. They're generally triangular in shape. They will stick upright. When you try to mow over them, they will almost always shred rather than cut. They're fairly easy to spot. If you've got low spots in your yard, that's where you're going to find sedges. Uh, and we'll address, hopefully, how to get rid of all of these. Whoops. Pre and post emergent. Pre-emergent, that's why I mentioned that calendar. There is something to do in February, and late January is what they're saying here, but you can get away with it in February with your pre-emergent. And the idea of a pre-emergent is you put it out and it keeps the seed itself of that weed from ever germinating and producing a new weed plant. And they've got those for so many of the common weeds that come up in our lawns. It's well worth looking into. Again, the first year you have your lawn, it may be difficult to come up with just exactly what you need to do. Something that happens this year may well happen next year. So at least mentally start keeping that history. Moving on to post-emergent, you've got a weed and it's up and growing, or you have multiple weeds like I do. I may teach the class, but I can't get rid of all these things. It takes a lot of work sometimes. But the post-emergent is going to kill the weeds that's up and growing. And there is a point where you might overlap. A pre-emergent, even though something is up and growing, it's producing seed. The pre-emergent is going to help eliminate those seeds from becoming the next round of plants. So they're not totally mutually exclusive. Things to consider in looking at product. What kind of grass do I have? That's the biggest one. Can't emphasize it enough. There are products out there that will kill St. Augustine and they're labeled for Bermuda. So if you have a St. Augustine lawn, be careful. Vice versa. You may have Bermuda and it'll kill Bermuda. It's made for a St. Augustine lawn. Make sure of what you have and what you're using. Where in the growing season? Am I back there in January, February, and I should be looking at my pre-emergence? Or am I in the middle of the summer? Am I almost October when I'm doing my final run through, trying to kind of shut down for the end of the year? What type or types of weeds do you have consistently broadleaf, or do you have just sedges that are showing up? Try to treat for a type of weed when you can. The other thing is going back to this idea of the history. What have I already done, or what have I already applied? That's the other reason to keep some notes on what you're doing with your lawn. Because if you've tried something and you saw some improvement, well, maybe it was the application rate that was a little bit low. Need to go a little higher with the same product. It seemed to work for you. So those are the reasons that I try to encourage people to think in terms of historical with their lawn. Your big box stores, and I have nothing against them. Shoot, if I didn't go to Lowe's, I'd think they went out of business. But read the label, whatever you pick up, granular or spray. And the thing I say about that, if you've got a smaller lawn and you can reach all of it with a hose, the spray or hose end sprayer type work great. All you have to do is literally connect a hose to it and go to work. There's no spreader involved. It is, the spray unit itself. The other thing is it labeled a pre? Is it the right time for a pre? If it's a post, that comment about 2,4-D is not meant to scare anyone away from it. It's been around for, I think, 50 years now. The thing about 2,4-D is it will kill almost any plant if you put enough of it on it. So be sure, again, you read the label, follow the application rates. And if you're using a spray type, be careful where you're spraying. Pay attention, stay on your property. you don't want to help out your neighbor too much. Or if they happen to have a different grass, you don't want them coming over saying you killed my grass. Here's some examples. Things I'd like for you to look at. Take the one on the upper right, says image, says atrazine. Atrazine is the primary ingredient in any of your weed and feed fertilizers. Atrazine will kill your trees if you go round and round and round with it. It views your tree as being a weed. You want to be sure if you're using that as a spray, and all of these particular examples are spray types. Don't spray that except on your lawn. Spraying it in your flower bed could be disastrous. Other thing is, at least the second one there I see says Southern on it. The third one's got Southern Lawns. That's a good indication, but don't stop there. Keep reading. You've got one there that says it kills nut sedge. That's most of your sedges. Hopefully it's going to get. And you've got another, the bottom row, third over, crabgrass. You see that these are fairly specific. The other thing about many of them, like the weed killer, the second from the left top row, kills broadleaf. As I said, know what you have. If you've got a lot of broadleaf, this may be the product you want to look at. And I'm not pushing particularly, a Spectracide or Weed B Gon or Ortho or whatever, but you're looking for a product that kills what you have. So identifying what you have is really important, if at all possible. One last time, this one's got the 4 Southern Lawns on it, and it's a broad spectrum weed killer. Before I get to what we're going to talk about really is fungus and the bugs, Nancy, do you have anything else here?
Yes, Don, I have a question. I have St. Augustine grass in part of my yard. After the freeze, it is bulb patches over 25%, but I can see green runners on the surface. If there are runners, will these areas fill in?
Yes, it may take time. Fertilization and water will enhance that, provided the runners are St. Augustine. The person said they had some St. Augustiner in part of their yard. If it's a mixed blend, sometimes Bermuda will overtake St. Augustine if they happen to have that as the other part of their lawn. But if it was strictly St. Augustine that died out, it may have just gotten terribly dormant and some of it died out. What's left will try to recover. They may want to look at just picking up some sod if the spots are very large and sodding those areas instead of waiting for it to recover.
Okay, that person just answered, this area is isolated and strictly St. Augustine.
Okay. If it's got runners, they will fill in. It'll take time. If they're large open areas, using some sod would just speed up the process.
We had one more question.
All right.
When is the best time to aerate St. Augustine grass?
When it needs it. I know that's not a good answer for them. Early in the year, or early in the calendar year, not necessarily the growth year. So it could be done even in February or March. When the grass is growing a little more actively, April, May, you're going to have better recovery. I said particularly with a Holotine machine, you get all these little plugs pulled out, and generally once you start into your cycle of mowing and doing that type of thing, you're going to be chopping those up, putting them back in the ground. In essence, the recovery is a little quicker when the grass is growing better, but it could be done earlier in the year. So it's more a matter of when you can schedule it.
Okay, that was our last question.
Okay. Well, let's talk about diseases and pests. Yeah. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if Sherlock Holmes could have been a great lawn care specialist, but his skills would have been great in terms of helping to diagnose the problems. Too much water, fertilizer applied at the wrong time, a sudden quick cold snap, all of those can cause problems for your lawn. Seems like I'm picking on St. Augustine here. Don't mean to be. This is gray leaf spot. It's a fairly common occurrence with it, and the grass has been left too wet for too long. Probably it was left too tall, as in too long. It creates a fungal problem. And those are, that's just part of what happens, not necessarily overwatering. This tends to occur when we get into the end of the year and you've got cooler weather and you have more rain occurring, that this will show up. For that person who's got St. Augustine out there, just the last item there, it's a granular that will take care of gray leaf spot if you happen to have that. Fluxostrobin, I believe is how that's pronounced. But it is the best thing that I've been able to research to find that takes care of leaf spot. This is the one that's really tough. This happens to be a picture of St. Augustine, but any one of the three major types of varieties we're talking about can have this. You look out at your lawn and you see these slight brown irregularities. There's probably something brewing. It's early stage and sometimes very difficult, whether this is going to turn out to be a disease, a fungal problem, could be an insect, in fact. On the disease side of things, this is a very common one. The slide does talk about the fact that it's incorrectly called brown patch. Hear Randy Lemon talk about brown patch all the time. Any number of garden shows talk about brown patch. We do not have brown patch here in the greater Houston area. We do have large patch. The fungus is almost identical. One happens to attack warm season grasses. The other attacks cool season. What it looks like is almost identical. So how picky you want to be, I don't care. The treatment for large patch and brown patch is going to be very similar, but it is a fungus. With large patch, again, this goes back to that history with the lawn and some learning experience, if you will. This is going to be early fall. And I've commented that some of these things are caused by the homeowner. One of the things on the calendar we'll get into is a late season fertilization. If you over fertilize and then it happens to rain heavily that night, you can create a situation where you've got wet soil, lots of nitrogen, and the next thing you know, you've got this fungus forming. So it's just as easy to, and in fact, with any of your fertilizers, the recommendation is to always water it in, but not to drown it in. You don't want it standing wet. So there again, it's kind of a matter of looking at what have they forecasted. Well, it's not supposed to rain for a day or two. This probably is a good time for me to go ahead and put out my fertilizer because I can put it in, I can water it in, and then it'll kind of dry out. So I'm not going to create this fungal the ideal situation or perfect storm for a fungal formation. This is just the first of several of the funguses we'll talk about. Let me give you some product here that will take care of it. Both of these, again, are hose in, obviously. All you have to do is attach a hose to it and get after it. You don't have to treat the entire lawn. Do the area where you're seeing any kind of discoloration and out beyond it somewhat. With large patch, it's usually going to take a couple of applications. I think on both of these, they recommended 14-day intervals. So that should take care of large patch if it occurs. This one is one I don't see as frequently in our area. And it happens in the spring and summer. It happens particularly, or you see it more frequently, where the residential setting may be relatively new or has just been built. If there was ever a tree and it wasn't taken out completely, you may have a root system under there, and it's actual decay that's causing this to occur. So it's not always going to be this bright green. Sometimes you may show up as a brown coloration. Other times you may have a little toadstool ring, but it's all considered fairy ring. And again, it's one of the fungus problems. And here are some things that, well, the first and third one are the same things that were available as I showed as hose in for the large patch. Astrostrobin is the middle item shown there. Any one of those is going to take care of it. The truth is, the same fungal problem is treated by the same fungicides. It has to do with frequency and how much of it. But by and large, I think we may run into one more new fungicide to use, but not going to be a whole lot of difference. Diagnosing the problem is really important, and I'll try to give you some help toward doing that. This is the worst of the fungal problems, because if we get it, it can lay dormant in the soil all year long. You get the right water and weather conditions, and it seems to rear its head again. And take all truly does. It takes all of the grass, takes the roots. You could grab this grass and you just wind up with a handful of mush type thing. And treat it with, well, I have one more product to mention to you, and this just happens to be an additional that hadn't come up with any of the others. But you'll notice that this is Southern Ag or Bonide makes this. Spectricide's got a product. Ortho's got a product. I see Scott's has got a product as well here. So it doesn't have to be a particularly branded one, but we're looking for the product itself. And again, this is not the only one. But those are the problems that we see in terms of diseases. And I hate to say diseases, it's more fungal problems than anything else that occur with the lawns. And treat them with a fungicide. Again, it's 14. Some of them are 14 or 28 day. And you can get rid of them. I keep going back to it, talking about this history. If it showed up this year, there's a good chance it may come back next year. You may get it under control. It seems to disappear. But if you see early signs of it next year, treat it with that fungicide as soon as you see it. Don't wait for it to get any further. Now we got the bugs. Plain old June bug, cute little devil, till it's a grub worm. And it starts eating. It literally eats the roots off of your grass. It starts turning brown. That's why I say when you first begin to see the brown, it's difficult to say, well, is that a fungus? Is that a bug? You got to get out and examine it. With the chinch bug, excuse me, with the grub worm, you could, when you first see it, you could grab the grass, and if the blades come up easily and there's no root, it's a good chance it's a grub worm. The other thing you can do is take a shovel and dig out some of that. If you find one, I wouldn't worry about it. If you get past having two in a square foot area, you probably want to treat for it. Triazide is a multi-insect killer. I think it treats, bag says 100 different insects, where GrubEx is specific to grubworm. You know, if there's a chance you got something else, you may want to go with a more broad spectrum versus just, but if you know it's grubworm and you haven't seen any signs of anything else, go with the one that's going to treat the grubworm and get rid of it. Here's the other one, and this is going to be St. Augustine primarily. As I said, you find this occasionally in zoysia, but it's primarily a St. Augustine problem. It's chinch bugs, and you hear about them all the time. There's all kinds of products on the market that treat specifically for chinch bugs. I think the pictures you're seeing, whether you're on a computer screen or whatever, this bug is a 1/4 of an inch to maybe 1/2 an inch. It's hard to see with the naked eye just at first glance. This is, excuse me, this is the kind of damage you'll see from chinch bugs. They're not necessarily eating the root out, they'll actually eat plant material as well. But the look is going to be similar to what you had with the grubworm. When you see chinch bug damage or you see grubworm damage, if you can examine right where the green and the brown come together in your lawn, that's usually where you'll find the critters. They're working their way through. Frequently with some of these, you'll find it seems to start at a sidewalk and move out from it. But again, if you'll go to where you still have some green, that's what they're after. So start there. This idea of putting it in a plastic bag, I've tried, and to me it was worthless, but you know, this is an A&M recommendation. The idea of a 6-inch diameter coffee container, that's a coffee can. You cut both ends out of it. You push one end down in the ground, put some water. Chinch bugs hate water. I think they drown, but they float to the surface very quickly if you have chinch bugs in the yard. And that's the best thing I've seen, other than actually being able to spot them in the yard. But trying to find them, because I say they are very small, getting them floating in water, you'll find them very quickly. Things that will control, and again, you see Scott's Ortho, Bayer, Spectracide, Green Light. Everybody's got a product. I haven't found anything in my research that says any one of these is more effective than another. So I'll give you your choices. Last bug is really a worm. And we don't have these every year, but they're very visible. If you got them, you'll see them. It's a caterpillar armyworm. Picture on the right is actually an athletic field that was just decimated. And it doesn't take them long. If they come in as truly as an army. They'll eat the blade, just eat it off. There's very little left to it. We don't see these. We'll hear about them. I know when I was doing Hotline, we used to get reports of there were armyworms spotted in this area or this area. So you kind of knew where they were in the state, or at least where they were active. I can only think of one time when they really showed up in the Fort Bend County area as kind of an outbreak. They tend to go after row crops more than they do grasses, but they can get into the lawns and they are a problem. So pyrethroids are by far the best thing to use on them. The downside are pyrethroids have a very short efficacy life. About 3 days is it, where some of the granular items, the different insecticides can be put on and tend to stay in place longer. Uh, if you're using a pyrethroid, if you can put it out early in the day, that's generally when the armyworm is going to be feeding. With any of the insecticides, they can be put out and just simply left, and they will kill, just not quite as effectively. They are slightly more expensive than the pyrethroids, but so it's a trade-off of how long the thing lasts. Maybe they'll eat all your neighbors and move on, and yours will be spared. That pretty well covers growing it, what's going to attack it, and how we can attack back. So I see there were some more items in the chat. Have you got something else there, Nancy, that I need to address?
Yes, I have a few questions. The first one is, I believe, when you're aerating aerating a lawn, what
Yes.
type of compost should you use for the grass after using a hollow or solid tine aerator?
You use
What-
the hollow if at all possible, but a really fine compost is an excellent top dressing. But you do want something that's fine and fully composted, almost down to dirt level, preferably.
Okay. Any thickness you want to recommend?
No more than 1/2 inch. You really want it, and you can almost rake it in, and it just gives the lawn kind of a brown tinge. You don't want it to be piled up on top.
Okay. So next question, what is the best way to fill in low areas of the lawn where water pools?
Sand works really well because water will continue to run through it, and almost all your grasses will grow into sand. The downside is you may have a spot that dries out more rapidly then. So if you can do sand and have a little topsoil to mix with it, that's your best bet.
Next question, what is the best way to transition from a Bermuda grass to a St. Augustine lawn?
There's not a good transition. Bermuda is going to overtake St. Augustine. You almost, if your yard lends itself, so you have a sidewalk down the middle and you can have a left and a right, you almost need to take out all of the Bermuda and come in solid sod with St. Augustine. There's not a good transition. The other thing about St. Augustine is sod or plug is the only way you can bring it in. Is no seed.
Okay, the last question, what is the best treatment for ants?
Ants.
Yes.
Spinosad works pretty good. Bayer, well, it was Bayer. I think it's now called Bio Advance or something. Makes a really good powder. If you're looking at widespread, trying to treat the entire lawn, some of the baits are the best way to go.
Okay, that was our last question. If if anybody else has a question, they could unmute themselves and ask you.
I'm not hearing anybody.
So you must have answered most of the questions. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Well, that we've pretty well covered it. We went through how to help your lawn look its best and how to protect it, kind of is a quick summary. So I mentioned some reference sites. AgriTurf is great. It's not because we're affiliated with AgriLife and A&M, but they've got a really good turf site. The second one down is the University of Arkansas, and it is very good. The third one's the University of Florida, and the last one is the University of Georgia. And I picked out particular parts from the other schools just because I found occasionally I can't get an answer out of the A&M system on something. And that's where I found these other schools to be very, very, very beneficial. But all of those are excellent sites for getting answers. The thing about AgriTurf, quick comment, the book on the right, look at it online, don't buy it. I bought it. It changes every year. It's 100 pages long or something like that, but it's got every chemical you could think of to kill weeds or kill bugs or whatever. But all of these are available as online items. But here's just an example of the publications section on AgriTurf. Weed control, insect control, disease control. They break it out into broad categories, and they are really excellent to use. I mentioned also calendars. Here's a Bermuda grass, and it actually tells you in January for mowing, this is what you should be doing. Each month there's what should I do within these broad categories, whether it's insect control, disease control, that type of thing. This one even includes aeration, and they've got it in April. So their recommendation is the more active growing months because you get better recovery and faster recovery. This next one, if you don't like the left to right, up and down columnar, this is another form of a calendar, if you will. It's more of a narrative. Do this at this time, but you have to read through it. I like the other because you can almost stick that up on the in the garage where the lawnmower is, and oh yeah, this is what I ought to be doing next month type thing. But again, there's this type of publication for both St. Augustine and zoysia, as well as the Bermuda grass. Lastly, if you don't find it there's the Fort Bend Master Gardeners as their hotline. Don't worry about this form. This is what you want. You can message them. That'll take you to that form, and you can fill it out, or you can give them a call. People are usually there Monday through Friday, by 9 o'clock, and they're there to noon. Sometimes they're there in the afternoons, and that's pretty much 5 days a week. Or you can email. Regardless of which form of contact, if you have a problem and you have a picture of it, try to include the picture. Truly, a picture is worth 1,000 words when somebody's trying to figure out what's wrong with your yard or what you need to do. So send those pictures. We already asked for questions. We have any more?
We haven't gotten any more questions.
Okay, I'm moving right along then. I think Nancy mentioned that we had some other things coming up, but here's the next two Grow Your Own, the next two Landscape Success. And certainly love to see all of you attend each of them. Grow Your Own is an in-person series. Landscape Success are all being done by Zoom this year. I mentioned that this irrigation basics is coming up, and they'll cover more at that time on controllers and timings and what's available. It's my last plug for our demonstration gardens. I won't guarantee that you're going to see this flower or that bee, but we really are proud of them, spend a lot of time, try to have plants that grow and flourish here in the Fort Bend County area. So, and we've got several different types of gardens that you can look at. And last item is please pick up your phone, scan the QR code, and give us your feedback. We'd like to hear from you. If I did a good job, bad job, if there was something else you wanted from this presentation, let us know about that. Last opportunity for questions. Nancy, I'm done. Oh, go ahead.
When using a spray for treating weeds, how long should you wait after a rain before you use it? And then how long should you wait afterwards before you water your lawn?
Most of the sprays, you want the grass or the leaf blades, whatever you're spraying, you want it dry when you start. And depending upon the product, they usually have a period. They'll say so many hours or 2 days. Normally it's no more than a day. 2 days is the max, and it's very rare. Most of the products will dry in an hour and be, not rainproof per se, but the efficacy is there. Also, with a lot of your sprays, they've got a surfactant included with it, which help it stick to wherever you're spraying it. So even if it were to rain slightly, it won't wash off as easily. If you know, I wouldn't have sprayed yesterday evening knowing what was coming last night. I'll put it that way. As far as the storm we had, if you know there's something coming, I'd hold off, but I wouldn't. And again, put it on when whatever your target is dry.
Don, I got this question sent to me. What about sodworms?
Treatment is going to be somewhat the same in terms of the products we talked about. Oh, before I forget or skip it completely, I mentioned this, and under insect control, they've got both Army and they've got sodworms listed here. So if they want the full write-up, they could go here. The insecticides listed here are going to be your best bet for almost any type of a worm. Not necessarily the pyrethroids. I lost you, Mary.
How do we get to the videos for this class?
That's a Nancy question.
So I've been
Yes.
sending that out. I will send the video out to all the registrants of the class, probably within a week. They'll be sent to your email with a link. So Don, we had one more question concerning ball patches in St. Augustine. You recommend laying sod. Any special treatment or soil before laying down the new sod?
The most important thing is what caused the ball spot. And that'll have more of an impact on what you might do before you put down the sod. Without knowing what caused the ball spot to occur, I'm hard pressed to tell you, just put the sod down. Generally, if you can rake out any dead parts of remnants that are there, and maybe take out a little of the soil, put back in soil, not compost or mulch, but soil of some type to level it up to where when the sod is laid, it's at the right height to match the rest of your ground.
Janet, who asked the question, you could unmute yourself if you wanted any further discussion. She might not still be there.
Okay, well,
Do we have any last questions?